Namaste and good evening, everyone. Today we continue Evenings with Sraddhalu, part 175. And today we have the honor to have Narad's presence in the background and his support. Namaste, Narad. Namaste, Sraddhalu.
Namaste to everybody. Happy to be with all of you.
We are happy to continue our current theme, the current affairs. And today it's part 4. We will be exploring the occult aspect of this topic. And as usually, you may send your questions beforehand at our email ID integralstudies.in@gmail.com, or you may address your questions directly on the chat box on our YouTube channel, Integral Studies. And so I invite Sraddhalu.
Yes. We have been in a topic which is somewhat heavy in many ways, but I feel unless we have this background, we will not be able to understand truly the root causes of the current situation in the world, as well as the primary drivers of the conflicts which we see all around us. And therefore, it's with a bit of a hesitation that I go into this kind of a depth. But the circumstances are such, and what is at stake, especially in the coming 1.5 years, is so important for the future of humanity that I believe it is far more important for us to know what is happening, even if it's uncomfortable, in order to understand the drivers of these events, so that we may choose our side and make a conscious effort to become centers of light, radiating, at the very least reflecting, which can help tilt the balance in the current battle between the light and the darkness. In the last 3 sessions, which I had titled in the first one as The Choice, which describes the razor's edge upon which everything is balanced, truth or the abyss. In the second one, we looked at how it is that human beings have built as if a kind of a wall that blocks out the light, prevents this wonderful world of delight from manifesting, and even keeps the large mass of humanity as if imprisoned in not just ignorance, but something much more limiting and suffocating. And can we dismantle it? This was the question. In the third discussion, which was last time, we looked at the powers which act behind the scenes, whose faces and names you will never hear in the media, and what they represent. We went back more than a century at a certain resurgence of occultism in Europe at that time, and the ideas of the New Age, world unity, and even a spiritual possibility, which were hijacked by a certain ideology, largely associated with Nazism. But really the name is a very limiting thing. The ideology itself is not bound to a name. And what this ideology seeks is to unify the world in a hierarchical one-world government, suppressing all individual freedom, where an elite will rule the mass of humanity, which would be like sheep. And this was described in great detail by the architects of the Nazi world order at that time, which in more recent times has been overtly declared as the New World Order. But it's still NWO, Nazi being replaced with new, but the agenda, as we saw, and even some of the actors who belonged to that earlier ideology, very much the same continuing. We also looked at some very important insights that most of these powers hide behind, curtained by secrecy, often inside intelligence agencies, controlling large global institutions as well as finances, politics, and the media, and so on. We looked at some of the historical aspects of that. Today I want to complete this broader discussion before we actually look at circumstances and situations of the world, including the ongoing issues that you will see in the headlines. But I want to complete this discussion today with a deeper dive into what's behind And unless we have this background, we will not be able to fully appreciate why the people in power, even among an elite sometimes, and sometimes even in a royalty, would behave the way they do. What makes them willingly choose to even destroy earth, destroy nature sometimes, willingly, knowing that their own children are going to suffer the consequences and they don't care. Why? How would that happen even? And why would people accept to go up that chain? Some of you might have already seen the video testimonies of Ronald Bernard, which I had put as links. If you have not, do please look at them. And for today's session also, I've added a few more links, including one of Ronald Bernard, where he's speaking at the International Tribunal of Natural Justice, where he describes his own childhood and how from childhood he was beaten violently by his father and what it did to him. And later, when the Child Protection Services put him in a child protection institution, the circumstances there were far worse. Why is that so? And we will understand some of this later. But when he went through the horror of the torture that he was, extreme sexual abuse and other forms of torture, one of the things he describes was how he was literally thrown out of the body, observing what is happening in a kind of an impersonal, numb poise of, I won't even use the witness, but insularity. And these were institutions owned by the church. And subsequently in life later, what he found was, as a result of all that he went through, he had literally within him a deep hatred for humanity, a deep hatred for nature, a deep urge to destroy everything in nature, destroy everything that is human. And he actually did that. He lived those values and later found himself pulled into a certain circle of elite financiers who shared similar values. But as they took him up the chain, at some point, he was invited to a child sacrifice ceremony. And that's where he says his own childhood came back to him with such force that he could not accept to participate. And from that point on, the elite began to remove him from higher access and then put him through extreme torture, a threat to his life. They said, if you ever reveal even one of our names, we will extinguish your entire bloodline. That means every human being ever connected to him by lineage of family and all the friends and associations would all be killed. That's the kind of power they have, and that's the kind of a threat that is offered. And as a result, to this day, he says, I will not name names, but I will tell you what happens. And to that extent, what he says is of extreme importance. He speaks also of why they need to go to that form of human sacrifice. He says one of the things which he was taken to was a kind of a church, which is the Church of Satan, where all the values are inverted, symbolism is inverted, and so on. And there they would have sexual orgies and various kinds of torture and other kinds of human beings treated in the most slavish and perverse forms as part of the orgy and the celebrations of the Church of Satan. And all these he took as lightly, thinking that it's all a game, it's all a pretense, like a Hollywood cinema, in which these things are now increasingly shown more and more, until he began to realize that behind it all was actually a power. And he began to not only feel the power, but had evidence of its effectivity, which is the part which I want to touch upon today, and understand what happens, how it happens, why they do what they do. In some, Ronald Bernard also said, going back many thousands of years, and it's been designed to make you a perfect slave and to suck dry out of you all life and all light, consume you basically by not just these human beings in an elite, but the forces behind them. And they start your childhood by injecting you with chemicals and then the educational programming to make you the perfect slave and so on. So I would like all of you who are interested in going deeper to actually watch that whole discussion. It's very important. And it touches upon things which I will allude to as we go along. But all this is to prepare you for a background. And this background we will most clearly understand when we read what the mother has to say about it. So I'm going to go to a text which is 1951, 8th of March, where somebody asks the mother, have all psychic beings the same origin? And she says the origin of the psychic life, the divine presence in matter, is one and the same. That's understood. But there are beings in the higher world who have never taken a body upon earth and who want to act there with a terrestrial action. So they wait till some psychic being attains their full development and unite with them to do some work according to their nature. That is, when an individual has sufficiently evolved in the psychic evolution, these higher diviner beings, let's say, align to them and create a kind of a link through which they share by giving some of their capacity and participate in the human life indirectly in this way. So she says, their consciousness is added to the psychic consciousness upon earth. There are beings who have never taken birth here, beings who materialized themselves more and more as the creation proceeded. They are perhaps the first emanations, beings sent into the universe for special reasons. Men call them gods or demigods. So, one of these beings may have chosen for some special reason a psychic being in formation. He helps it, follows its development, and when this psychic is sufficiently ready and sufficiently strong to be able to support the identification, he unites with it, identifies with it to do some work upon earth. You will recall Mother's brother, and Mother narrates this about him. He was standing on a bridge in the middle of Paris looking at the river, and then suddenly from above there came this voice that said, "Do you want to be a demigod?" And he says, no, I don't want any of that. I just want to serve humanity. And Mother said, oh, what a fool. It was obviously an event. It doesn't have to be through a voice, but some being, some higher consciousness perhaps, that wanted to align with him and work through his intention to serve humanity. It doesn't happen always in such a dramatic way. Often it is a gradual unification of intent and so on. So I continue with the text. This is not very frequent, but it has happened and still happens. You find stories in ancient traditions about gods incarnating upon earth. Some mythologies speak of them. That corresponds to something true. But all psychic beings are not necessarily united with a being of the higher planes. Now, you will remember also Sri Aurobindo writes in Savitri in the introduction. He says that these characters, although the name symbolizes certain grades of consciousness or powers, but these characters are not merely symbolic representation, they are actual incarnations of those powers, playing out on earth the actual relation of circumstances in the higher worlds. So this also happens, though not very frequently. We do know of some very unusual beings. I will give an example of a scientist such as Nikola Tesla, who obviously is a vibhuti. Now he might be an evolving human being, but at some point aligns to a higher power and becomes a vehicle now for literally manifesting the whole electrical age for humanity, and so on. But now we come to something else, which is preparing us for our discussion. So Mother takes up the next question. Have these vital beings a psychic being? She replies, no. I said that the first thing they have to do to incarnate is to drive away the psychic being of the person whom they possess. So now we are talking of vital beings, not diviner beings. Vital beings want to get into a human being and do something similar, which also is possible, obviously. But for that, they have to drive away the psychic being to possess. And then she says, that may happen from the very birth. There are children who are almost stillborn. They are taken to be dead, and suddenly they revive. This means that a vital being has incarnated in them. Now, all of us would have seen in newspapers sometimes such articles, some child is dead and then suddenly comes back. Or an adult is dead, comes back, and after that the personality is different, and so on. She says, I have known such cases. This may happen also in the course of an illness. Someone is very ill, and gradually he lets go of the contact with the psychic being. Then in a swoon, or in some other similar state, he cuts the contact entirely, and the vital being rushes into the body. I have known cases of this kind also. Or it may be a slow action. The vital being enters into the atmosphere of the person, goes on influencing him, and finally brings about illness, attacks, especially mental illness. Then a time comes when the connection with the psychic being is entirely cut, and the vital being takes possession of the body. There are cases of people falling very ill and coming out of the illness altogether different from what they were. Very often it is this that happens. Then, next question. You've said that these beings of the vital world are attracted by the spiritual life. Why? The mother. They are attracted, but this does not mean that they have decided sincerely to follow the spiritual life. The chief characteristic of these beings is falsehood. Their nature is made of deceit. They have a power of illusion. They can take the appearance of divine beings or higher beings. They can appear in a dazzling light, and truly sincere people are not deceived, but they immediately feel something that warns them. But if one likes the marvelous, the unexpected, if one loves fantastic things, if one likes to live a romance, one is likely to be easily deceived. Not long ago, there was a historical instance, that of Hitler, who was in contact with a being whom he considered to be the supreme. Hitler actually thought it was divine. This being came and gave him advice, told him all he had to do. Hitler used to retire into solitude and remain there as long as it was necessary to come into contact with his guide and receive from him inspirations which he carried out later very faithfully. This being which Hitler took for the supreme was quite plainly an asura, one who is called the Lord of Falsehood in occultism, but who proclaims himself the Lord of Nations. He had a shining appearance. He could mislead anybody, except one who really had occult knowledge, and could see what was there behind the appearance. He would have deceived anybody. He was truly splendid. Generally, he used to appear to Hitler wearing a silver cuirass and helmet. A kind of flame came out of his head, and there was an atmosphere of dazzling light around him, so dazzling that Hitler could hardly look at him. He used to tell Hitler everything that had to be done. He played with him as with a monkey or a mouse. He had decided clearly to make Hitler commit all possible extravagances till the day he would break his neck, which did happen. But cases like this are frequent, though on a smaller scale, of course. Now, this example is extremely important, and I'm going to link it to what was described earlier by Ronald Bernard, and you will see the connection shortly. Mother continues, Hitler was a very good medium. He had great mediumistic capacities, but he lacked intelligence and discrimination. This being could tell him anything and whatever, and he swallowed it all. It was he who pushed Hitler little by little, and he was doing this as a distraction. He did not take life seriously. For these beings, men are very tiny things with whom they play, as a cat plays with a mouse, till finally they eat them up. Now, this is the background we have to understand for what Mother describes in relation to Hitler. Now, there's another discussion she has some years later, 1965, January 12th. And this is in the agenda, where she speaks of this again. And the background to this, which the mother was responsible for. So I read from this now. I knew that being very well, Mother says. For other reasons. The story would be too long to tell. I wish she had said it. And once, I knew he was going to visit Hitler. I went before he did. I took his appearance. It was very easy. Then I said to Hitler, go and attack Russia. I don't remember exactly the words or the details, but the fact was that I told him, go. In order to have the supreme victory, go and attack Russia. That was the end of Hitler. He believed it and did it. 2 days later, we got the news of the attack. And then, Mother says, and then the next day, that is when I came back from Hitler, I met that being and told him, I have done your job. Naturally enough, he was furious. But all the same, in that consciousness, there is with that being, the Lord of Falsehood, one of the four emanations, there is, despite everything, a very deep relationship, of course. Now, this is something fascinating, and perhaps we will come back to it at the end of our discussion today. And Mother is saying she has a deep relationship with this being, Lord of Falsehood. So he said to me, I know I will be defeated eventually, but before my end comes, I will wreak as much destruction on earth as I can. Now remember, these are one of 4 asuras, but 2 of them Mother has dealt with. This and the other, which is the asura of death, these are the 2 who are still there. And Mother says, then as I told you, the next day the news of the attack came, and that was really the end of Hitler. But Sri Aurobindo and the Mother were working together, so it's interesting. She says, as for Sri Aurobindo, you know that there is a place in Russia where they were defeated. Sri Aurobindo had foreseen the defeat and had worked the night before. And that's how it happened. We knew all the details. We never told this, of course, but it was perfectly precise. But I knew that being. I had already seen him in Japan. He called himself the Lord of Nations, and he really was a form of the asura of falsehood, that is, of truth which became falsehood, the first emanation of truth who became falsehood, and he hasn't been destroyed yet. So this, of course, refers to the defeat that took place in Stalingrad, where Hitler met. The Russian winter came a month early, stayed a month late, and that was enough to destroy the whole, all the plans, and it finished the whole Axis effort and tilted the whole direction of the war. But when Mother says, I have a very special relationship with this being, what does that mean? And she speaks about this in a different place, and I'm going to read from this again. This is from 1959, March 26th, again in the agenda. She says, she speaks of how she converted one of the asuras and defeated another, dissolved the other. And these 2 who remain, the Lord of Death disappeared, he lost his physical body. As for the other, the Lord of Falsehood, the one who now rules over this earth, he tried hard to be converted, but he found it disgusting. At times he calls himself the Lord of Nations. It is he who sets all wars in motion. Now we have to understand, you can say, Ukraine war started with XYZ. No, human beings are still puppets, human interests are triggered, but what's behind it all? Yes, you can say there is the cabal, there is the organized institutions, but what drives them? Well, this is the thing. So you have to understand the hierarchy of influences, and then we will really get a full picture of what's happening. So it is he who sets all wars in motion, and only by thwarting his plans could the last war be won. She's speaking of the Second World War. This one does not want to be converted, not at all. He wants neither the physical transformation nor the supramental world, for that would spell his end. Besides, he knows, we talk to each other, Mother says. Beyond all this, we have our relationship. What's that relationship, we are wondering, right? So read on. Mother says, for after all, you see, she laughs, I am his mother. One day he told me, I know you will destroy me, but meanwhile I will create all the havoc possible. Divine Mother is equally Divine Mother of all beings, including the Asuric beings. And this relationship is there. And so you have to understand that there is this whole thing of this power, and yet there is overwhelmingly above it all the power of the Divine and the Divine Mother. And even the Asuras are children of the Divine Mother. And so at any point it is possible to intervene and override, which is what she did in the Second World War to tilt the things. But why can't she do that all the time? Because human beings are what feed and nourish these beings. Human beings are what give it the right to exist. And so the Divine cannot override the human will, can, but then it would be pointless, until we choose. And as long as we support this, these things can exist. When we choose to refuse, then the end is inevitable. So, then she says something else which is quite interesting. She says each time one tries to defeat these forces, one removes the power, it is replaced, or some representative of this power, it is replaced by another, and it switches forms. It's not bound to a single form, and so on. So I read again from the same text. She says, The Titan has been specially sent to attack this body. She speaks of her body. And he can't do it directly, so he uses people in my entourage. It is something fated. All those around me who are close to me, and especially those capable of love, have been attacked by him. A few have succumbed, such as that girl in my entourage who was absorbed by him. He follows me like a shadow. So this is just to say that human beings are so vulnerable to these entities, when of course they have an interest to do something. And we need not fear, because none of us are of any use to these beings. But just to give an example of how, because they wanted to attack the mother, well, it was through one of the persons in the entourage. So mother says, you could remove a person, you could even remove them from the physical world, but these beings, they don't act in a single person at a time. They're actually connected to several and can work through many. So I'm coming to this part of the text, again going back to the first text that I read, and there she says that when you have ambition and vanity and stupidity and pride, then mostly you end up opening to these things and you get easily used. And she says, these beings, typically vital beings, they are immortal, so they cannot die. So even in a vital world, in a vital battle, she says, the experience is always the same. If you fight in the vital world with a vital being, you can crush it, kill it, but it will be reborn always, because they form themselves again. I think herein lies the origin of the legends of the hydras or monsters with many heads. There is only one force in the world which can destroy them categorically, that is without any chance of return. And that is a force which belongs to the supreme creative power. It is a force that comes from beyond the supramental world. It is not at the disposal of everybody. It is a luminous force of a dazzling whiteness, so brilliant that if ordinary eyes looked at it, they would turn blind. A being of the vital world has just to be touched by this light to get dissolved immediately. It is liquefied, like those slugs which melt in water if a little salt is put on them. And so, coming back to Hitler, someone asks, when Hitler died, did the Lord of Falsehood pass on to Stalin? She says, it's not altogether like that things happen, but it's something similar. This being did not wait for Hitler's death. It is there till you make a mistake. These beings are not at all tied to a single physical presence. The being in question could very well possess Hitler and at the same time influence many others. Hitler was got rid of because he had behind him a whole nation and a physical power, and if he had succeeded, it would have been a disaster for humanity. But there was no deluding oneself about it. So you see, they removed the physical person, but because of the physical circumstances, but the being can operate through many at the same time. So she says, it is not sufficient to get rid of him in order to get rid of the force that was behind him. That is not so easy. I must tell you that the origin of these beings is prior to that of the gods. They are the first emanations, the first individual beings of the universe, so they cannot be got rid of so easily by winning one war. As long as they are necessary for the universal evolution, they will exist. The day they lose their utility, they will be converted or will disappear. So this is as far as I will go with this. The point I want to make, though, in Mother's description, there is something fascinating. She speaks of how these beings align with a human being to act through them, participating in human affairs, or bit by bit, through a gradual influence, they begin to influence and then eventually cease. So, the vital being enters into the atmosphere of the person, goes on influencing him, and finally brings about that change. A time comes when the connection with the psychic being is entirely cut and the vital being takes possession of the body. Now, this is the part I want to highlight. Why? Because we're going to enter into a dimension of this whole question of the elite powers ruling humanity, which is a bit disturbing, it's a bit darkish, but don't worry, it won't be too troubling, but it is necessary to understand things. When we look at an example such as Hitler that the mother referred to, do you think he just appeared out of the blue in the middle by chance? Do you think removal of this one person ends the story? Rather, during the time of Hitler's rule itself, he ensured that what was created with him and through him was extended to a collective consciousness so that even without him that action could continue. Isn't it? And that was the basis for the elite of the occult SS. I spoke of the SS last time, where it was the frontal aspect and then there was the occult core. These people, some of them representing the elites in around Hitler, including some of his generals, would meet at a table which had 12 seats. Why 12? It's as if you take the spiritual symbol and pervert it. So every symbol of great power was taken and perverted to use for the ego of the individual, the collective, the nation, or more likely the ego of the asura which is behind that whole operation. So they ensure through such means that they transmit those values and make new vehicles ready who can be good, effective mediums the way Hitler was. As the mother observes, he was not very intelligent, without much discrimination. But what if you took an intelligent person and made out of him a good medium and made that the next in the lineage to continue that work? And so it is only with this background that you will understand why this thing has continued for so many thousands of years. That occasionally you have had these people who come up in the form as in Hitler, where it takes a military form, but otherwise they stay behind, operating through institutions, sometimes religious institutions, economic institutions, political institutions, and so on. But they build a continuity, they build a lineage in which they create vehicles which may continue that work, so that the force behind has a continuity. Just as you have spiritual lineages, you can have equally dark lineages, and they are built deliberately. And here I am going to link it to what happened and what is described by Ronald Bernard. He describes how there is a Luciferian program. Okay, that's for the masses. But he himself was subjected to this kind of abuse, including sexual abuse, that for several years, days in and out, again and again, across several times a day, in an institution that is run by the church. And he says, what happens at that time, literally you're thrown out of your body as a way of separating. He uses this phrase, forced out of the body, a dissociation. And he says, pushed back to the source. The abuse, the pain, the suffering. He said literally he was living in hell. If at all there can be an earth and heaven, then this is hell. And he says, pushed back to the source. That's the phrase he uses. Literally the soul is withdrawing in the sheer pain and suffering caused by the abuse and wants to go back to its origin. What happens at that point? Inside the human consciousness, the psychic contact and the link is weakened and pushed back. Layers created of separation, which then allows precisely what the mother described, that vital being, vital influence to get in. And if that link is completely broken, well, the person is completely possessed by the vital being. And Ronald Bernard makes another observation just in passing. This is also how they used to, this is what they use to awaken paranormal, what they call psychic abilities. You see, children are naturally living between two worlds, very young children especially. And so they have an access to inner and higher openings. But when subjected to this kind of extreme torture, they are pushed out. That is, the psychic being is pushed out, but at the level of the personality, they are halfway between worlds, and it's as if all these things open out to them. It is a terrifying experience, but it is also the method used in certain lineages to force the opening of these powers and at the same time to seize and pervert the personality. Why is this so important? Because you will find in most of these lineages which hold power, there is some such practice inherent in the lineage to build vehicles in which the soul values cannot come forward, the psychic being is pushed aside, separated, and perhaps even thrown out, allowing for these other vital beings to enter, to seize, to possess partially or fully. And this technology as a method has been around for a while, but it was developed and perfected under the Nazi rule by this Dr. Mengele You've probably heard the name. He is known to have tortured human beings. But what was the point of those tortures? Why would you just brutally torture people? So they would push them to the point of suffocation, they would push them to extreme cold, extreme heat, etc., and extreme forms of torture. Or it was not just done just for pleasure. It was part of a technology being developed. And the point was, so approaching it from a very biological perspective, they wanted to break down the whole machinery of personality to create a blank slate upon which a whole new personality could be rewritten. This was the intention, at least that's how it was medically explained. Brainwashing is the term used in the common parlance, but it's a term which is very powerful in its in the vocabulary. You literally take, brain being symbol for the mind, literally take that and wash it clean as a slate. And then upon it you can write a whole new personality. Now this technology was developed and was transferred along with the scientists, because this was being done by medical scientists, including Dr. Mengele. By the way, he never died, he just vanished. Transferred to the United States, buried inside what I described last time as the inner core of this cabal center. And while some of the more technology scientists are well known, Werner von Braun, etc., who then took the same technology of the Nazis who built the most advanced missiles and brought that in the United States. United States was struggling with the most basic rockets. They were literally toys compared to what the Nazis had. They come here, rebuild now the more advanced exact Nazi program, transplanted to the US, except now this becomes on one side the civilian apparently program, which was to build these rockets to go to space, but meanwhile it's the same technology being used to build the missiles. And if you look at the names of the missiles, all of them are associated with demons. One of the biggest missiles was known as the Titan. Now Titan not as in Titanic, Titan as in the Asura. A missile is named after the Asura. So all these missiles, programs, etc. were entirely Asuric. They named them with Asuric names. They christened them, if I may use that term, because they actually did a ritual which was the inversion of the church ritual. The Church of Satan uses the same symbolism upside down, inverted, and would actually invoke these powers and celebrate the fact that they had created instruments of death. Now all this is going to that ideology, remember, buried inside. But the names, well, they're all hidden, because what you see in the public is a different story. And this technology became, going into the United States, what was later known as the MK Ultra program. Now the MK Ultra program was at that time, and this is all official, officially the CIA ended it in 1973. But from the end of the Second World War till 1973, this program was ongoing. And generally what they do when a program is very successful, they officially end it, transfer all the scientists and the technology to a new program which is now classified, you'll never hear the name, and continue using it or developing it, perfecting it further. And they keep changing names. So it's very difficult to track the maze of how the programs are hidden. But MK Ultra was officially intended to create the perfect assassin, who is a person who is programmed to kill somebody and himself does not know that he is programmed to kill. So this is what they call the Manchurian Candidate. There were movies, 2 movies which have been made with the same name. You can look at those, slightly made into a bit of a fantasy, but the concept is correct. They are programmed, for which they have to be taken to this extreme point of brutality, and the psychic being literally is pushed out in the way that Ronald Bernard describes, forced out of the body, pushed back to the source. And at that point you have this clean slate into which you insert what? And here you invite, or this is what the Nazis were doing in their elite, inviting occult beings, forces and so on to possess or partially possess or insert layers of personalities and so on. There are many descriptions of people who have been through the program, especially in the early stages of training, when they were still they had not perfected the technology, and who later broke it. I have narrated an example earlier, many years ago, in one of these discussions with Narad, and it was an example I had given where this lady was programmed, and she was an actress, and they would program her with keywords. So the moment they spoke one keyword, she would go into a state of trance, And then she would be given instructions, and they would give another keyword, and she comes out not remembering on the surface the instructions, but internally, subconsciously following it as a post-hypnotic suggestion. And she was made to do many things, pass on messages and so on. And at some point, all of them are programmed to commit suicide when their use is over, and there's a keyword to trigger that. So at some point they triggered that. And she was supposed to travel to Europe, to a particular, in Switzerland somewhere, to a ski resort and commit suicide in an accident. That night, the night before she has to fly out, which is the next morning she flies out, she goes to a party, meets with a doctor, falls in love with her, spends the whole night with him, and misses her flight. Now, this is the psychic being pushing back against the surface programming. And the doctor realizes she is behaving strange, talking strange, as if she is hypnotized. And it happens to be a doctor who knows hypnosis, and he begins a process of putting her under hypnosis and reversing the earlier suggestions. And that's when he discovers that she's been programmed in these ways, and he discovers the layers of programming. And there's a whole book that came out subsequently, which describes all this, the experience of the doctor, and he was able to bring her out of that. Now, this is to show you that when such a thing happens, the psychic being is struggling, but there are layers. The perfection of the program was made when they realized that they had to first pick children early on in whom the separation was made strong enough that the psychic being could not push back or had been evicted from the body, and then to create layers of personality, sometimes going through 2 or 3 or 4 layers. There's one example which is again documented. This is one of the assassins for, I think it was one of the Kennedys who was assassinated. When he was in jail, somebody came and did a hypnosis to try to get him to speak the truth. And they discovered a personality behind the surface personality. As they went further, there was a third personality, and eventually reached the 4th personality, and the person said, I am, and speaks out certain number, I am such and such, property of the United States government, and you have no authorization to go further inside. Very interesting, fascinating even. So this is all documented. There's nothing which is not available out in the public domain, validated. This shows you how far the technology was developed before 1973, when officially the program was stopped. And the technology is so fascinating. There's another example of a person who was in the US military, and the only job officially that he remembered was he had to go and copy papers, documents. He was a good typist. And then he was sent to Korea. And then he was taken to secret meetings with North Korea. And he doesn't remember anything other than typing those papers, except later under hypnosis he was able to recall that there were certain keywords. When told those keywords, he would go into a hypnotic state. He would be sitting there at a meeting, come back from the meeting with total recall of everything spoken, and would type everything out. And then he would be told another keyword and he would forget everything. Literally, you have a programmed human robot. This is the kind of technology developed. Now, this is one side of the story. The other side is the more perverse, satanic side of the story. But the underlying principles and technologies are the same. The result is a person like this, placed now in a position of power, is the perfect Manchurian candidate. So in the movie, the Manchurian candidate is a United States president who's been placed there after this kind of programming, which is done to him during his military tenure. Then he is placed by the powers that be, becomes president, and under that position of power, they control everything that he does. Now, you could have a willing Manchurian candidate, you might have an unwilling Manchurian candidate, end result is the same. If the person is head of a bank, head of a corporate, head of a nation, head of the media empire, it could be anything. But the kind of control that is possible through the hypnosis is what I'm pointing to. There's a third side to this whole question. If you have perfected this technology, where you can literally make a person do anything, can you not apply the same technology now on the mass? And make the mass do what you want? Exact same principles used. What's the difference? You have to first, this is the key element here, push back the psychic influence. Remember Ronald Bernard, when he was taken up the chain of the hierarchy of finance, the first thing he was told, you will have to put your conscience on ice. The symbolism, the wording is very interesting. Conscience on ice means freeze it, make it ice cold. You feel nothing. You have to become a sociopath. In other words, your psychic influence and its values have to be completely blocked off. Then you're allowed to go up and do all the nasty things, and that's when they give you access to the power. But this is one key element, separating the psychic. The moment you've done that, all the higher help, all the inner help, all the conscience is how we see it in its most superficial form, is completely blocked out, and you are a puppet now, open to this influence. Now imagine this being done now through the media on the masses. You are creating on the masses a circumstance which makes it easy for vital forces to descend, to influence, and eventually slowly creep in and possess. So start with a single thing. One of the key elements of MK Ultra right at the beginning is they have to drug you. To put you through the first layer of indoctrination, they have to drug you, suppress the surface mind. And that's done through LSD and other drugs. And there are certain drugs which are ideal for hypnosis. And there is another... I'll come back. So, and alcohol, of course. So, once you're drugged, you're inebriated, your higher faculties are blocked off. That means the higher influence can no more wake up the lower and prevent you from being taken over. Next, you're made to become numb in conscience. And how do you do that? By precisely making you used to things which are so ugly and crude and coarse that your sensitivity retires and is covered up. I'm going to give two examples of how this was done recently. There was a whole cult which was created in Hollywood. Again, mainstream media totally ignored this. The person who's owner of the cult was one Rainer, R-A-I-N-E-R. And his assistant, who was the link person, a woman, was a very famous film star. And they got inside Hollywood and brought film stars under their control. The movement was called NXIVM. You can look it up. The man was finally arrested and put in jail, but the mainstream media covered it up completely. Look at what the NXIVM participants did. And these were some of the wealthiest, most famous stars. There was one lady who was the inheritor of an empire of alcohol, very famous woman, something with B. Branson or something. And she is in that as one of the elite groups. What did they make their followers do? They were made to watch movies which had ugliness, coarseness, crudeness, sometimes gore, sometimes people being tortured. And they were told, you have to become strong and watch this. You have to learn to be fearless, watch this. And it was done in a graded way. Every day you watch something, and then again and again. Slowly the psychic influence pushes back. It is so repulsive, so ugly, so perverse that something in you shrinks, until there's a point where it's gone so far back you don't feel it anymore. Now you're ready for the next step of the programming of the new values and the perversion. Until you're able to finally, eventually kill people, feeling nothing at all. I'm going into this in some detail because you will very quickly recognize where it's going. Look at the movies that are being projected every day today across all the television channels in the world. All of them are pushing you towards slightly more crude, slightly more coarse, slightly more ugly, swear words, some of the most filthy forms, ugliness, and bit by bit slipping into the vocabulary. The latest recent trend of the last few years is they have made these replaced swear words. Earlier swear words had to do with sexuality. I'm sorry, I don't want to say those words here. But every time somebody will use a F-U-C-K word as part of your normal vocabulary. Children today will use that word as part of a routine. Why? What does it mean? At some point that word becomes so normal that you begin to live that value. But the part which has been done very interestingly in the last few years, again through cinema, you killed it. When you achieve something, Earlier we would say, you nailed it because you hit the spot. It's been replaced by you killed it. You did something wonderful, you killed it. So you killed it now has become a celebratory word. And at some point you celebrate by you kill it. And when you hear in the media, somebody killed it, in your mind is, that's a good thing. It's very deep programming. It's not conscious. Consciously you say, oh, that's silly. I will never think like that. No, it's happening at a much deeper level. So there is this mass programming that's been happening now, going back, especially I will say from about 2003 onwards. Actually 2001, when this whole 9/11 took place and the media was perverted and hijacked to spread those stories which we discussed last time. But 2003 onwards it came in a big way inside cinema in Hollywood. And a programming of negation. Till then, Superman was the man who did good, defeated the bad. Batman was a man, a hero, superhero, did good, defeated the bad. Suddenly from that point, all these superheroes became inverted. They were doing the bad, and the bad people were the good. Interesting. And the bad people were the heroes. And more this perversion of reality was made normal in children's movies. So you remember in the children's movie you have this princess and then there is a witch, and suddenly now the witch becomes the heroine and the princess is the bad one. Perverted, inverted values. And it's being pushed from that age. And children who have grown up with that age now, nearly 20 years let's say, have been programmed into that world. With that came one more thing. Deep, subtle messaging, symbolism of the satanic order. Now again I'm going to step back briefly, but you will understand where all this connects as we go a little further. I'm going to step back briefly and say, well, what is this business of symbolism? Just as in the occult and spiritual domain, a symbol can be infused with power, so too in the domain of the darkness, same power, same principle, same effect. If a symbol, a spiritual symbol can protect you, a perverse symbol can, expose you to that very thing, activate that power. Just as in the yoga system we have mudras, gestures of the hand for whatever, invoking, evoking, activating certain energies or forces, generally for good. The same hand gestures can be used for the very opposite. And where these people participate in those kinds of rituals, they become more and more embodiments of those forces, and once they're linked to the force, the symbolism has a tremendous power. I remember here when there was this craze for a while, some 25 years ago, for what they called pranic healing and Reiki and things like that. There was one person who I had met, and she said to me, ever since I got initiation in Reiki, my powers has increased tremendously. She didn't realize what had happened. When she got initiated, she opened herself to the occult force behind the Reiki movement, and now suddenly she was a vehicle for that force. She was its puppet. And now she is so attached to the sense of self-importance and power and the high of the power flowing through her and its miraculous effect, that she becomes a willing instrument for that power. Maybe it's doing good, but what if at some point it decides to do something different? Well, the same person would find herself compelled to do those different things, whatever they may be. I would like to believe at least that Reiki and pranic healing were put out by these vital beings with some benevolent intent. But you understand the principle is exactly the same. And it could begin as a benevolent movement masquerading a deeper intent that could suddenly come forward at some stage, isn't it? So what you have here is people consciously opening themselves to what they feel is a power that aligns to their ambition. Remember the keywords that the mother spoke of, which allows this alignment and the possession. And if you have those and you open consciously, well, you become an instrument for that, just as you could be consciously an instrument for the divine consciousness and light. There's a difference though between these two instruments. The divine consciousness will give itself not to be used by you, because it would defeat its very purpose, which is to fulfill a higher truth. And so in the relationship, there's a difference that you have to choose to open to a higher truth and allow its action through you, setting aside your personal preferences of ego, desire, etc. But you don't give up your individuality, you don't give up you don't become a puppet. You fulfill yourself in a higher opening because you align to your soul's values rather than your ego values. In the dark occultism, Church of Satan, let's say for want of a better word, it's the very opposite. You set aside your psychic values and soul nature and deliberately indulge in ego, desire, ambition and self-affirmation of the narrow kind. And for that, to fulfill that, you open yourself to a force which gives you the high and the push to achieve your desire. Except, this is the catch. When you seek to fulfill your desire, if you ask yourself, where did your desire impulse come from? Think about it. It's such a profound question. Did you choose to have that desire? No. You felt a desire impulse rising and you say, this is my desire. But you didn't choose it. So the more you indulge in your desire impulse, the more you become puppet of the source of that impulse, which is never you. And so the more you align to these beings and the more you become an instrument for them, you become possessed and overwhelmed by their desire impulse, which you wrongly consider to be your impulse. So now watch what happens. You've been drugged, you've been plied with alcohol, and now you're told, move with the music as your body desires, as your emotions desire. Jump up and down to the rhythm of the music and start. What does this remind you of? A discotheque? Or one of these places where you have young people jumping around to loud music? And then listen to the words. And I remember one place I had heard, I am losing my senses, I am losing my sense, I am words to that effect. Following my desire, give myself to whatever impulse, etc. So the words are being programmed into you to make you become a puppet. The music is making you jump and you're allowing yourself to now be seized by the music. It's interesting, when you actually enter the dance floor, you don't dance. You let the music seize you and make you dance. And all the time around you in that alcohol state, your higher faculties, higher connections, spiritual links are suppressed, numbed, dulled, and the dark begins to surround you and possess you. You open yourself willingly because of the high that it gives you. What happens afterwards when you go back? You've just been programmed and you've been hooked into by this. Tomorrow you decide, hey, I don't want to go there. You can't help it. It's going to pull you. It's like an addiction that pulls you. The force of addiction is similar. When you're addicted to something, it's literally a hook that power has in you that pulls you. And literally you feel, if you're conscious in your subtle body, it pulls you. And you feel this pain of not having it because of the pull. And when you indulge, it's as if you followed the pull, and so the pain is less. Now imagine this being done on a mass scale across the earth to all young people. Cinema now feeding these symbols. And all this I took as a diversion from when I was talking of the power of symbolism. And these symbols are everywhere. And then you are being made to put those symbols on your body because it's cool. Look at the tattoo parlors. Look at the young people imitating tattoos that they see in cinema. And they call it cool without understanding the symbolism and the power of the symbolism behind. And before you realize it, you have become a puppet. The more you get sucked willingly, the more it pulls you down, 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 until the psychic influence has retired so far back that even if you wanted, you'd find it difficult for it to emerge. Unless your psychic being is sufficiently mature, asserts itself, overrides this, and pulls you out, which also happens, but less often than the other. So you have this symbolism being used actively, methods which are used for MK Ultra mind control, where you can actually program a person to kill somebody else. And same technology used to make you behave in whatever way that the elite decides. Now, when it comes to this hypnosis, if you read all the literature on hypnosis, they will tell you, don't worry, hypnosis is totally safe. You can never do something against your own will. If you don't want to do it, you won't be able to do it. Not true. I've put another link for today's talk. I've put several links which you will find helpful to illustrate some of these. And I've put another link there, which is a link of Darren Brown. Darren Brown is this mentalist, hypnotist who does stage performances. Some of them are quite amazing. And in this one, he shows you how he can hypnotize a person to kill. And this person, so he picks obviously the most easily hypnotizable person. You could do it to anybody in principle up to a certain point. But some people are much more open. So he picks one of these guys, hypnotizes him, puts a post-hypnotic instruction. And you will see in the movie, in the documentary, this man goes to the theater and the audience is of course set. The performer has been told that you're going to be shot, we're doing an experiment, and they put the Hollywood type blood and so on, the devices to make the blood. Of course the gun itself does not have a real bullet, but other than that everything is real. This guy goes in the middle of the performance, there's a trigger word he has been told. At the point of the trigger word, he calmly reaches out, pulls out the gun, shoots the performer, puts the gun back. And he's totally unaware of what he has done. He gets up from there, he's a little confused, he gets up, he walks out. He's asked, what happened? Nothing, I don't know, what did I do? He's shown the video of what he did, he can't understand, he can't recognize, he doesn't remember. And you'll see in the video, little by little, Darren Brown uses hypnotic suggestions to bring back the memory of the post-hypnotic suggestion, at which point he experiences this cognitive dissonance. One part of his mind believes he has done this, another part is unbelieving of it, and there's a conflict, literally a split in his consciousness, and he looks dazed, confused. Why am I giving this example? Because in fact you will find this happening all over the world today, because of the post-hypnotic suggestion through the mass media, contrary to your soul psychic aspirations. And in people you find this cognitive dissonance. And it makes them extremely nervous, rattled, creates internally psychiatric problems, because you feel your personality as if half split, two different parts competing against each other. I don't know which one to follow. Sometimes it makes you sick, not just psychologically, physically also. But that's the extreme form of the cognitive dissonance. But there's something else which happens also. If you take a person like this and program him to do something, he's experiencing internally certain stresses. And now I'm come to an example of something which is quite unusual. In the United States, you would have seen in the last few years, repeatedly, these school shootings which take place, where a gunman walks into the school, shoots everybody, and eventually shoots himself. And some of those are so weird, so unusual, that you cannot explain the behavior. He buys a gun in one state, travels across many states, goes to a school that he does not even know, and shoots everybody. Why would he do that? If he was just angry with society, why not do it right there where he was? And you don't explain it. And then he shoots himself. And very conveniently, within a few minutes, there is some agenda which is put out in the media, and that's it. But I remember watching in one of the things which had happened at that time in California. The school shooting had just taken place, and this time they caught him before he killed himself. And about 2 hours after the person was arrested, the police chief comes and meets the media. And I remember watching that video. The media persons ask him, why did he do it? Has he given any reason for what he did? And the police chief says, not yet. He's still in a daze. And I said, this is it. Why is he in a daze? If he had intentionally done it, he would have been proudly saying, this is my agenda, this is why I did it. He's in a daze because he does not even know what he did or why he did. And they're telling him he just shot people, and there's this cognitive dissonance. So a large number of such events taking place where it's very unusual, very strange behavior is happening sometimes by a deliberate, active, programmed player who then is made a patsy and blamed for whatever it is, which happened also in the case of Kennedy assassination and others. Or the same technology, the same principle applied on a large mass, and you have the result of the confusion that you see today, increasing internal stresses, psychological stresses. You literally feel as if your personality is torn between two very contrary impulses. What is the solution? And if you are somebody with a spiritual orientation, recognize that the part which is going contrary to your spiritual aspiration is probably coming from that external programming. And you can make a choice to wake yourself out of that hypnosis. Because this is the fact, at the end of the day, the psychic influence is strong enough to override any external programming. That's why I gave the example of that woman, where the psychic influence literally led her to the doctor who could deprogram her and save her from committing suicide. Again, I will take another example of how this works. You will recall for a while, there was this, what they called a social media challenge. It was called the Blue Whale Challenge. Suddenly you heard all over the world children were committing suicide every day in the hundreds. Why? Because they had got caught into this Blue Whale Challenge. What was that challenge? In the social media, somebody would reach out to you and say, hey, are you really courageous? Can you do this? Here's a challenge. Now you look at any of these social medias, they are promoting themselves with a challenge. So TikTok will say, here's a challenge. Do this. What is it? Imitate somebody's song. Imitate their movements. It's not a challenge. It's easy to do. They're programming you. Can you do that? Go and do that and come back and prove to yourself with a photo, I succeeded in this challenge. And once you've done this, you're taken to the next challenge and the next challenge. So in the Blue Whale Challenge, it would start with simple things like tell a lie, hit somebody, cause harm to somebody, steal something. And as you go up, each time they would praise the child and say, oh, you are so courageous, you are so good, now can you do this? And then it came very quickly to a point where they were asked to watch horror movies. And they would be told, watch this at midnight all alone in the darkness in your room and do not tell your parents about it. And what does a horror movie do? It creates a fear. Of course, you are trying to prove that you're courageous. But in that fear, you are opening to the energies of that horror movie and of the images of demons or Satanism, etc. And so the children were made to go through that. And each time they would harden a little more and harden a little more, and the psychic influence being pushed back. And each time they are rewarded with praise and appreciation. So there were 50 steps to this Blue Whale Challenge. Towards the later part, they were asked to cut themselves. And so that had a very interesting effect. Each time they would cut themselves. And you will see today increasingly in movies, especially in the new movies of the new media, including Netflix and others, you're shown children hurting themselves. Now imagine what happens when a child sees that. And in the movie, the context is you cut yourself to feel good when somebody has abused you. And the next thing is this child is going to feel like doing it, because whatever we watch in movies, we tend to imitate. So you're cutting yourself. And what it does is very interesting. It causes pain, and subsequent to the pain, the release of endorphins. You get a high. Now it's like a drug addiction. You're being programmed to go deeper and deeper. You don't need drugs for that, but it's the same addictive principle. You're pushed to the last stage where they would ask you to carve a blue whale on your hand, take a photo and put that on the social media. Now you've reached the final stage, and the last was go and hang yourself. And then they would hang themselves. That's your last sign of courage. Would you say courage or would you say stupidity? It's too late. It's not stupidity anymore. It's programming. You become a puppet. The psychic influence has been pushed aside. That's how you can do something so extremely stupid. If the psychic influence was there long before, somewhere along there, you would say, what is this craziness? What am I being asked to wear? What is this? What does this have to do with courage? You would break out. So very early on in the training program, and this is MK Ultra programming, you start pushing away the psychic being, the psychic influence, suppressing its higher and spiritual influences and values. Then you're open to the lower baser programming. And imagine this is being done through cinema. Look at the number of horror movies, the number of Satanism, symbolism and images in the movies, all addressed to young people. And all of them involve murder, suicide, killing for pleasure or on a whim or an impulse, use of drugs, alcohol, casual sex. And with it all, you will find, if you know the correct things, you will see the symbolism of Satanism all through, pervasive throughout the movie, for children. In Hollywood, in Disney cinema, and Disney is supposed to be for children. In Disney cinema, you have symbols of pedophilia and of perversion. I mean, it's so sad. It is so sad to see, but you have to really see it. It's done in subliminal messaging, so you don't always see it. If you look at the movie, you freeze on a single frame, then you start seeing those symbols. And sometimes, what was it? I think it was in The Lion King. The smoke that rises, and as it moves, I may be wrong with the movie, but it was one of those types. The smoke that rises as he looks up, and if you see inside, it says sexy. Why? Subliminal programming. You're infusing into the children certain values which are of your larger long-term satanic agenda. You've all heard, perhaps if you have not, then look it up, Epstein's Island. This is a very famous person who had access to the highest levels of Hollywood, media, judges, political leaders from across the aisle, scientists. He had an office sitting in MIT. And what is his claim to fame? He was into child human trafficking. He had an island which he owned. He was so rich. To which they would have this plane flying which was called Lolita Express, where young children were taken with these adults, and some would come back, some would not. One of the survivors of his victims, one of his victims surviving, many did not, many have vanished. One of them says, in the first flight that I was taken to the island, my name was not on the plane roster. And when he began to make sexual advances, I knew if I did not commit, if I did not follow, I would not come back from the island. So she accepts, and she says subsequently in each flight her name was on the roster. So some children did not come back. What happened there? And this is the part where it gets dark, and this is the darkest we will go in this discussion, but you must understand why. So in one of the things in the Satanism and the Church of Satan and the symbolism involved is the power that they tap into of these Asuric beings, but also to appease the Asuric beings they have to perform a human sacrifice. And that's the last stage which Ronald Bernard found he could not get into, child sacrifice. And had he done that, he would have been put into that elite group, which he says in total across the world are about 8,000 people of that level of elitism, who have access to all the resources, all the funds, and all the political power and the media power, just like that. They can do anything, practically. And even the law of the country will not touch them, because even the judges are subject to their control. But for that, he had to go to that level. He broke down, he refused, and that's when he lost it all. But this is the last stage where, as a result of that, literally the power behind, the satanic power behind, has the power then to feed on the human suffering and even to partially materialize. So what you hear from people who have been through those kinds of rituals, they say they eventually see that being materializing, and there's a whole conversation. They are granted their wishes, Satan materializes, whatever form it takes. And so for that they have to feed this little demonic entity, and it could be any entity of the lower vital world. It does not have to be a very big asura, but the sacrifice. And that's when your conscience is completely obliterated. After that you have nothing. Your conscience is on ice pack, which is what he had been told to do when he went in. Now I'm going to this, and I won't go further in this, but so that you understand why this is still happening and what is the control behind. Now I'm going to give you another example of how this works. And what we find increasingly is this: the number of children being trafficked and the number of human beings trafficked generally is going up dramatically in the last 20 years, rising every year. And today the total value of human trafficking is actually equal to the arms trafficking globally. It's maybe by now it's already happened. Human trafficking value is about to cross arms trafficking value. How many billions of dollars? And this is according to UN reports. Again, nothing which is not published. According to UN reports, 8 million human beings are trafficked every year. And this is the official record. Unofficially, we don't know how many more. In the United States, according to one estimate, 400,000 children, 400,000. That's literally Pondicherry population, town population, number of children, and children specifically, who vanish. Some are found, the bulk are never found. In the open border that the United States has to this day, that's part of the political controversy between various groups. There's a huge number of human beings coming in. Elon Musk puts on record that there's about 2 million people coming in per year, unaccounted. Among them, children, often coming without parents, without any of their relatives. Blood types don't match. They are in the hands of traffickers. Sometimes parents give the children to the traffickers saying, I wish they will have a better life. What do the traffickers do? Well, they sell them. What's the market for? 3 things. One is for as sex slaves. Second, organ trade. And third, human sacrifice. Now, this is very interesting to observe because when under Trump the border wall had been put up and are largely blocked with a very active patrolling, the number of people crossing the border had dropped dramatically. The number of children kidnapped in the US shot up equally. Fascinating. And it was timed. The timings are with Halloween, which is one of the satanic dates, celebratory dates, and some other which have to do with the solstice. I'm pointing to this so that we understand the scale at which this is taking place. And the intent behind that, which is to dehumanize people who control at the top, but at the bottom, the slaves, which we are, our children, and us, to dehumanize us. And this has gone so deep, it's so well organized, it's so well entrenched, it goes back a couple of centuries. It was recently, about 5 years ago, I think, or less, in Ireland, they discovered in one of the boarding schools, which had been shut down about 20 years ago, they discovered some 200 bodies of children buried in the ground. They'd all been killed. What does a boarding school for children have to do with the death of children? And a few survivors of that period at which point came out and said how they had been trafficked for sex to some of the elites, including some politicians. In the United States, I believe it is in the region of Philadelphia, just recently, a couple of years ago, they released the names of 200 priests who had been abusing children in their churches. But they released the dates after a certain time lapse, after which you cannot put them under bar, and you cannot put a court case against them. After that time had elapsed, they released these numbers. Of course, the victims are still out there. In Chile, in 2018, 31 bishops resigned because of child sex abuse scandal. 31 bishops. You have to understand the scale on which this is happening. 31 bishops resigned to protect the Pope, because the Pope was found to be protecting openly one of the bishops who was involved in the sex scandal, and all the others were also equally, but this one was openly known to. And to this day, 5 years later, Chile does not, the people of Chile still do not accept, do not trust the church. 20% of them in open polls said we don't trust the church, and we don't trust them specifically with child sex abuse. How is it an institution which is so big, associated with spiritual, religious, or whatever values, has such a huge problem, and the numbers are huge? You have to understand what a bishop means in terms of how many people are under his influence. And again we see this pattern where priests, bishops, sometimes cardinals, found in some sexual controversy of child abuse, not adults, it's all child abuse, protected by the church. And finally, the United Nations recently passed this document, which is by the justices around the world in consultation. I don't remember, maybe 200 justices involved, who say that we have to become softer with child pornography and pedophilia. We should not take it too strictly, and some guidelines to reduce the criminality of pedophilia. Why would you say? Why is this so important? Why is UN pushing countries to reduce the crime value of pedophilia? And I'm going to go one more step in this. In Hollywood, you have heard of Macaulay Culkin, very famous child actor who was famous for this movie called Home Alone. Very cute player. If you've seen those movies, you'll never forget them. He became a child star, but later on, he went into severe psychological problems. He had drug addiction and other problems. And then one day on his Twitter feed, he uses some of the satanic symbols. He says, "They eat babies. There, I said it." And then he narrates in one of the interviews, he describes how when he was 12 years old, one of the producers approached him when he was still a movie star and wanted to have sexual relations with him, and he refused. At which point the producer pointed to his shoes. He was wearing red shoes and said, "You remember that star, Heather, child star, and she died? Well, these shoes are made from leather from her body." And he said, "If you accept, then I will make you a superstar." And this he puts on record. It's part of his, I have nothing here which is not on record. He's not the only one. You have Mel Gibson, who made the Jesus movie in Hollywood. At some point, he broke out of the Hollywood framework and began to speak about this openly. And he speaks of how, this is all in an interview where he says, very carefully worded, he says that I always found there was something weird, things which would happen in hush-hush, having to do with children, having to do with sexual abuse. And there was one particular hill and a house on that, and everybody would say, never go there, do not go there. And it was obviously associated with some satanic practices and child sacrifice and so on. Now, this is all to tell you that this is not a casual, superficial thing. It is a whole religion, an Asuric religion. Whatever form it may take, whatever name it may use, it is finally an Asuric religion in which human sacrifice, and especially children, and the abuse of children and the perversion of children is part of their ritual to ensure the continuity of their values and their power and their, I'm going to use this word, mediumistic ability. You remember what Ronald Bernard says, that this is how they forced the dissociation and amplified certain opening to those Asuric and occult vital influences. Well, this is the basis for this. And it's very serious. The symbolism goes very deep. The intention is very deep. The organization is extensive. And the symbolism, once you know what to look for, you'll find in every cinema. For example, in the elite layers of the company called Netflix, a lot of these people are there. And which is the reason why, and because I know some of the symbols, I will say something like 8 out of 10, sometimes 9 out of 10 movies will have at least one song which is addressed to Satan or Lucifer. But you have to know what it means, and you have to hear carefully the wordings. And they'll say, there'll always be something about fire and him being a friend, and he's giving you what you desire, and the wordings tell you, this is what you're talking about. Okay. And there's a whole series now of cinema. There's a whole TV series called Lucifer, where they teach you what is their belief system of who Lucifer is. And there you'll find God is this old man who does nothing, gives up casually, vanishes, is never present. And Lucifer is the good guy. He never lies. He's always there for you. He's there to satisfy all your desires. In return, he only asks that you should be willing to accept when he asks you for something. The game is subtle, but that's how they lead you into that whole belief system. And one of the symbolism they use is covering one eye. And if you see that anywhere on fashion journal covers, advertisements, any film actors with an image with one eye covered with the other hand, you know that's part of the same agenda. They're part of this Church of Satan by whatever name it takes. And finally, I give one more example of how there was a person called John of God. There was a whole movie made on him based in Brazil. He used to heal people. And I saw the movie and I said, wow, this guy is pretty effective. But what I saw, he had dozens of people sitting there in his place, and they would all feel forces, beings working on them and healing them. But what I felt when I saw that first was just this, that there were a very strong occult force, but many beings. And I asked myself, why would they do that? You can't have so many benevolent beings. There's something being given back, but I couldn't find any sign of that. And then a few years later, I think it came out. So this man was promoted by Oprah Winfrey and all the Hollywood names. Many US politicians were going to him. And then it comes out that he had a whole farm with many women, all of them made pregnant, sometimes by him, sometimes by his followers. And all the babies were illegally birthed and sold in the international market for $40,000 a baby. Untraceable babies. For what? Who would buy an untraceable baby? Who would want to buy an untraceable baby? And then you come into this whole domain. And this is what was the return he had to give back to the beings who were working for doing whatever healings he was doing. So this is just a glimpse. I am not going to go further in this, but you understand how serious it is. There's a movie called Sound of Freedom. Do look at it. It gives you a glimpse into the human trade. And it includes, of course, not just children, but also women. But this thing that they become slaves first, they're used for organ trade or sacrifice eventually. And at the level of children, this is so common across the world. It's very sad. It's one of the most painful things. To the soul which is evolving, it is a huge setback. To the satanic, asuric intentions, it is a perfect success. Because they've just managed to delay evolution, they've managed to create such pain at the level of the psychic being and its sense of purpose. They've separated the psychic from its connection with the human vehicle, allowed the human vehicle to be influenced, darkened, possessed, and so on. So just as the light is willing to build or is struggling to build its ecosystem for light and awakening, the dark has already built its ecosystem, which is already entrenched and perpetuating going back a few millennia. Ronald Bernard also speaks of how he found eventually that this thing was there, and he speaks of how even in the Bible it is, I don't know about this directly, but from what he says, there were those 10 tribes who were banished because they indulged in child sacrifice. You have in Babylon this Moloch to whom you had to sacrifice children. So you have many things going back many centuries of this kind of practices. And you will see suddenly there's a rush of movies being made about child trafficking and human trafficking, but they all mitigate the problem. They make it seem like an exception, like an aberration, to cover up the fact that it is so extensive. And there's one little thing involved with this also. Some of those who have survived these things also come back saying how the elite sometimes hunt them. They're released into the forest and hunted like animals, and it's part of the game that the elite has because they've been so numbed from the higher values. And so all this is a little picture of the forces behind and the people behind. I come back again to the phrasing used by Ronald Bernard, that he says he hated humanity, hated nature. And for them somehow to do something which harms nature, which harms humanity, which harms even human evolution, is a high, is a satanic high. So there are symbols which you will see sometimes politicians, film stars use. One of them is this, which is supposed to be the head of the devil. I don't want to do it more. But it's a symbol which they use often in their public programs. With both hands, you will see pictures. I don't want to name the politicians, US presidents, who will make gestures with both hands to the whole audience. To them, they are projecting a power, a hypnotic power to seize upon people. And there are other such symbols which they use sometimes, all done openly. Once you know what the symbols are, you will see them everywhere. Sometimes they use these triangles, which are all, many of these are Masonic symbols. You look at our social media, full of the same Masonic symbols. The M of Google is a Masonic symbol. The G of Google is a Masonic symbol. The triangle, inverted two triangles, which Apple has in its Apple store, is a Masonic symbol. And that just tells you the people who control these social media companies are part of certain occult traditions and openly using the symbols as a way of projecting power to seize upon humanity. This is the point I'm getting to. And themselves being part of that are perverse. And now we have a sufficient understanding of why the world is in such a mess. because it is in complete grip of these forces in a very organized way across all systems. The control is so thorough. So Epstein had a list, this little black book that his assistant used to have, which has all the names of every big name, politicians, judges, and film stars, etc. They have all the names. He was arrested, she was arrested, she's still in jail, he was made to suicide. When he suicided, obviously the cameras were switched off, everybody was asleep somehow. Although he was on suicide watch, nobody saw him being killed. She's still in jail, the little notebook is in somebody's hands, and to this day, no name of any of his clients who all indulge in child sacrifice or pedophilia, none has ever been revealed. That tells you the power that they have. The entire justice system is corrupted. The entire political system is corrupted. Banking systems. The New World Order or the Nazi World Order is really the same. Across the global systems are all infiltrated and corrupted at the highest levels. Now you can go up the chain up to a certain point if you're good. Beyond that you cannot go up. And this is the reason why you see the bad people going to the top. You do not see good people going to the top beyond a certain point. This is the background under which we will now look at the situation in the world, and then you will understand why it is the way it is. Otherwise, you will not understand, because you do not understand that there are people out there in power who want to destroy humanity, who want to corrupt and enslave your children, who want to push away the psychic values, who want the Asuric influences to possess humanity, who want to destroy nature because they hate nature and they don't care what the consequences are, because they do not have the conscience left, they do not have the psychic values. Many of them are under direct influence or even possession of Asuric energies. Recently, and we'll come to this when we discuss climate change and other issues, one of the brilliant suggestions which has come from Bill Gates is to protect the earth from carbon dioxide and climate change. He will cut trees, he will buy up large tracts of forest land, cut trees and bury the trees to hide the carbon so that it is not released in the atmosphere. And that's a solution for climate change and carbon. Think about the perversion involved. It's not by accident, it's by design. And this is the part which is the most painful for people to understand. I'm sorry I'm repeating this, but you have to understand it is by design, it is by intention. The Ukraine war did not just start because of conflict between groups. It was started by individuals who want the suffering. Because one of the key advantages when a war begins is you have large numbers of people who become migrants, and there you get fresh blood for human trafficking. Children as well as adults. All people vanish during wars and nobody knows. It's assumed they have died in the war. No, they don't. They've been transferred, they've been taken into these institutions and vanished. When the Haiti earthquake took place, it is on record by the Haiti government that a plane load of children took off with the parents crying because their children were taken away from their arms. A plane load of children took off and vanished, nobody knows where. And this is still recorded in the Haiti newspapers. We don't hear it in the mainstream media outside. And this is done so openly. So, I'm sorry for the darkness that this entails. I'm going to review what we have looked at. There is an agenda by the powers that be. Hitler was not an exception. There's an agenda to create a lineage of these mediums. Most of them are hidden behind the scenes, who become agents for these darker agendas. They created a technology by which you will force the psychic being to be pushed out so that people can be brought under this satanic influence on the masses but also on individuals to be programmed in the MK Ultra programming. And in the mass programming through television, it is exactly the same thing which is being used. And all this is for them who do participate in this, the reward for their loyalty to the Asuric energies by indulgence in the power and whatever other benefits they feel they get. This man, Ronald Bernard, actually says in one of his talks that I see my friends who were in that system, most of them have died from their indulgence in alcohol, drugs and other vices. And he says, sometimes I wish I had joined them so that I too would have died and I wouldn't have this weight on my conscience. But he also says, interestingly, across that whole system where people have got stuck into that, once you're in it, you can't come out, you're blackmailed, you're bound by oaths and stuff. Across the system, there are people who want to break away, but they cannot unless people wake up. And as long as people are aligned to the system, they cannot come out and declare what has been happening and how they too were trapped. And so he says the first step required is for people to wake up. And for us to choose that we don't want this. We want something higher. And then to affirm, to demand, to make a difference in our own lives individually and then in all those who we influence. And this is why the spiritual awakening is so important. And you can now understand why everything out there is against the spiritual awakening. Everything out there is intended to put you to sleep, to hypnotize you, and to pervert you. Because that side is fully organized. This side is not. You have to stand up. You have to organize, push forward these values. I'm again repeating things I've said before, perhaps. To some of the children I meet when they say, but we are under peer pressure to drink alcohol at the age of 15 and 14. I say, why don't you reverse it and create a counter peer pressure? But you have to tell this to children. You form a group of people who don't drink alcohol and make a big deal about it. See how they are actually growing in intelligence while they are destroying their brain cells and perverting themselves. And make a club that celebrates this. You have to organize, build community, build collectivity of light, of values. And that's the only way we will be able to, at the very least, form pockets of light. Is this going to change? Yes, it will. And we will look at this from when we now take up the world situation. We'll take up specific things, starting with perhaps what is happening in India, and then look at the Ukraine war, look at what's happening in the US, and also climate change and other questions which have also come, and look at it from this perspective and see where things have been warped, what is the underlying truth that has been distorted, and what can be done to correct, to bring back the truth and make the right action. And as far as possible, some of it will be controversial because, as you can see, so much of this is hidden by the media, which is itself complicit in hiding because they are part of it. When you see the client list of Epstein, all the media moguls were part of it. All the technology names were part of it. So I've put actually 2 links about this in the description of this talk. I would like you to look at that because it's quite fascinating. Some of it has to do with the Chile. I put Darren Brown's link. I put Epstein link. Recent trove of emails which revealed what kind of network and connection he had, and Ronald Bernard's main talk as well as several others. You'll find those very helpful. I'm just looking at the chat box. Rajesh mentions there is a movie called Eyes Wide Shut, directed by Stanley Kubrick. Yes, I would have wanted to mention that. Stanley Kubrick actually tried to expose this elite group in the movie Eyes Wide Shut and some of their sexual orgies and the symbolism they use. In fact, he reveals a lot in many of his movies, including some of the government secrets that he was part of. It's quite fascinating if you look at, there's one website which did a psychological analysis of his movies. And if you can find that, it'll be good. If I find it, I'll put it for next time. But in fact, this movie Eyes Wide Shut revealed much more than the cabal would have permitted. As a result, he died. Well, he was killed. Just before the release of the movie, he dies mysteriously, no reason given. And then the agencies who were behind step in and cut out some 20 minutes out of the movie. So there were 20 minutes of what he was revealing which they did not want to go out into the public, which is why there are certain transitions which are a bit abrupt, but still the movie gives you some glimpse of just that aspect of the orgy, but not too much more. And I think other questions we will take up next time. So I want to come back with what the mother said and end on a positive note, because finally this is what matters for us. Among human beings, there is something unique which does not exist in the other worlds. Of this, the mother puts it in these terms. She says that in answer to a question, she says, Narada was a demigod, and on a commentary on an aphorism, she says he was a demigod. Seeing the human being, he could not see the spiritual content of Janaka. Why? Because he did not have a psychic being and therefore could not see the psychic in others. So I'm going to read that part, which is quite fascinating. How is it Narada was unable to see the soul? She says, to me it's very simple. Narada was a demigod, as we know, and he belonged to the overmental world and was able to materialize. Those beings don't have a psychic being. The gods don't have in themselves the divine spark, which is the heart of the psychic being, since only on the earth, I'm not even referring to the material universe, only on the earth was there the descent of the divine love that was the origin of the divine presence in the heart of the matter. And naturally, as they don't have a psychic being, they don't know, they have no knowledge of the psychic being. Some of those beings even decided to take on a physical body in order to experience the psychic being. Not many. And then she says, to be in contact with the soul, that is to say with the psychic being, you must carry in yourself a psychic being. And only men, the men of evolution, those issued from the terrestrial creation, possess a psychic being. All those gods are without a psychic being. It's only by coming down, by uniting with the psychic being of a man, that they can have one. But they themselves don't have one. So I want to come to this as our focal point. Whatever may be the circumstances, whatever the extent and the nature of the darkness, within us is the light. And if for them they need to push out that light to be able to do their mischief, that is the one thing they fear. If their entire technology is oriented towards suppressing that light, it's the one thing that can defeat everything in their agenda. This is our greatest strength, and it is the one thing that no one can take away from us, but you may give it away if you allow them to play you. But if you choose not to give it away, they can never take it from you. And so, become conscious of the divine presence within you. Become aware of its influence that fills you, and increasingly more and more aware. Refer everything you do in your day and night increasingly to that center, simply by looking at what you did from that center. Align yourself to your central aspiration. Observe everything you did in the day. Some things align, some things don't. Some things resonate, some things dissonate. Observe, and automatically, bit by bit, things begin to align within your life more and more around this influence. This is our greatest gift as human beings, which even the gods of the higher worlds do not have, cannot have, for which they must take birth to experience. It makes the human being unique. It is also our greatest protection, because from that center of light within us, which we are, not we have, we are truly, we have also the direct link, the contact and the recognition of the divine presence. To the psychic being, it knows itself a child of the divine mother. It knows itself a part of her, and therefore nothing can ever extinguish it. In itself, it is a center of immortality. You know yourself eternal, and then you can face the whole world without fear, because nothing out there can extinguish it. They can harm the body, they can harm the mind, these are layers. They cannot harm you, and you are immortal. On the other hand, the light of the psychic being, as it glows even a little bit, drives them away. They fear it, because it may awaken their psychic being. It may cut through all their programming. It's the one thing they fear. So the one thing which will change everything in the world today, in the balance, is the awakening to the light within you. And therefore this is the one thing we should all consciously work for within ourselves, to the extent possible reflecting it in the lives around us, in those around us. And if in our relationship with them, in our interaction with them, something of what we have touches, reflects, it evokes and helps them come out. Again, I look at the example of Ronald Bernard. He says, after coming out, it took him 10 years to undo, to reverse. And somehow that was the shock where the psychic influence suddenly came forward and reversed the whole movement. It took about 10 years for him to heal, or maybe more. But today he says he is healed. Why is he healed? Despite having the most traumatic childhood, from childhood onwards, and having done the most horrible things. Why could he be healed? Because the psychic being within you is the one thing which can heal everything. It is the one thing which can bring back the harmony. It is one thing which can bring back the divinity and dissolve, dissipate all darkness, all clouds, all ignorance. And this light is inside you. There's nothing more important for your life, for the future of humanity, than awakening to this light, to this presence, to its influence at the very least. Give yourself time every day, whatever form it is. Read something beautiful which aligns to your heart's, soul's aspiration. Do something which expresses that aspiration. Speak some words. Interact with someone, some book, something which nourishes your soul's aspiration. It can be for 5 minutes. How much time do you spend to eat food to nourish your physical body? Take out 5 minutes to nourish the soul and to allow, to invite its influence to fill your life. Whatever the circumstances of the world, all this can be dissolved, will be dissolved by this effort that all of us will make. I will pause here and invite everyone to concentrate together in an aspiration that the divine light may fill the world, dissolve the clouds, dissolve the darkness, replace it with all that is waiting to manifest on earth in the divine creation. Despite the appearances, that is inevitable. And so for us to open to it consciously and become instruments for it is the one thing we can all do. I read again from the mother where she says, the gods don't have in themselves the divine spark which is the heart of the psychic being, since only on the earth was there the descent of the divine love, that was the origin of the divine presence in the heart of matter. And this divine love is seated within us. To open to it, feel our love for the divine is the easiest way to open to it. Give yourself time for this every day. Namaste.